Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we are back for episode 16 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk about players whose value has increased post-NFL draft, which was about 3.5 weeks ago now. And so I have some players picked out at each position that I am more interested in having on my roster now as opposed to about a month ago. And so I have some reasons as to why and whether you should go out and trade for these players or feel more comfortable with having them on your roster. Have a number of guys to touch on. So before we get into that, though, I just want to remind you, go follow us on Twitter at Dynasty War Room. Go follow us on YouTube, or subscribe, I should say, at the same handle. And if you've missed any of our previous shows, you can find them on your platform of choice. We're on everything out there that carries podcasts. If you still have a rookie draft that is coming up, go check out our rookie rankings. That's episode 13, where we go through our top 24 rookie rankings. And then episode 14 is where we discuss some sleepers and some third and fourth round players to target in your rookie draft. So go check those out if you have not listened to them already. And without further ado, let's just jump right into the show. So we'll start at quarterback. Let's just run down positions. We'll do quarterback first. And next week, we'll have a show where we talk about players that I think their value has decreased since the NFL draft. But today, we're going to stick with the more positive side and talk about players who I think I am more interested in now. So starting at quarterback, the big one that just signed a huge contract extension is Jared Goff of the Lions. So Jared Goff has been sort of consistently undervalued, I think, throughout his career, but especially the last couple seasons with Detroit. And he was QB7 in Dynasty last year and QB15 in points per game. So I think that puts him at a very, very solid, right at that 1-2 turn of quarterbacks in terms of Dynasty value. But if you're able to have Jared Goff as your QB2 in a Superflex league, I think that is a great situation to be in. He's largely consistent, especially when he plays at home or in a dome. He just is consistently better indoors, and that's a good thing this year because the Lions have all but 3 of their games in a dome this season. So just another reason to like Goff and this Lions offense. But he's going to be there now for several more years. I mean, he signed the 4-year extension. They have an elite offensive line, one of the best in the NFL. They just re-signed Penei Sewell. They extended Amon-Ra St. Brown. They still have Gibbs and Laporta under contract for several more years. So this is a very good offense. Ben Johnson returns as OC, and I think the Lions offense is just a good situation to target in fantasy football. So given the fact that people do undervalue Jared Goff, I think it's a situation where you can maybe acquire him for a little bit more on the cheap than, if he had a different name. And so Jared Goff, I think, is really the first guy on this list that I am targeting. I did acquire him in one league. We talked last week on our trade review show that I picked him up in a league, traded away a few picks and players to get him. So I think if you're a contender and you need a quarterback 2 or even a quarterback 3, obviously no harm in adding a player like Goff to be your QB3 either. So you can play the matchups in that type of situation. So I really like Goff this upcoming year, and I think he'll return on his current price if you were to make a trade for him. Next up on this list, I have Will Levis, second-year quarterback of the Titans. And this is a situation that's a little bit different than Goff because obviously Will Levis has not proved himself in the NFL, but the Titans went out and they got him a bunch of weapons in free agency with Tony Pollard and Calvin Ridley. And then in the NFL draft, they went out and they drafted J.C. Latham to beef up their offensive line. And Tyler Boyd, they picked up post-draft as a free agent. So, a couple smaller moves with Boyd, and then, drafting an O-line, I guess, is a little bit bigger than a small move. But in terms of fantasy, it's not like that's, a huge deal, but it certainly helps. Obviously, Will Levis is going to need that offensive line to be better than it was last year for him to be an impact starter in fantasy football. And the Titans have done really everything possible to put him in a situation where he can be a good NFL quarterback. And if he shows that he is the answer for the Titans at quarterback, this is probably the year that he's going to do it. and it would send his value skyrocketing in Dynasty. I mean, this would be somebody that would go from, a borderline starter, somebody that you're hoping has more than a year value to, hey, a Jordan Love type of situation, depending on how well he plays. So now is probably the time to take your shot if you believe in Will Levis. I have him in a league. I'm not necessarily actively acquiring him per se, but it's a situation where I'm not looking to move on from him. He's a solid hold for me in Dynasty because I do think that there is some upside here. And with these weapons, he still has DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley. I mean, this is a veteran wide receiver group now. This is, Trey Burks, you can probably kiss goodbye. If he stays with Tennessee, he's going to be in that wide receiver 4, trying to push Tyler Boyd type of situation. But, this is it for Will Levis. I think all the makings are there for a breakout season. And so I'm willing to buy in right now at his current price, which I think you could probably get him for, a 1-2 turn type of pick. I think he's being viewed very similarly to Bo Nix. So it's sort of a matter of preference about whether you are more interested in Bo Nix or Will Levis, but I think that's how most people view him. So take that for what it's worth, and see whether you're looking for. I think this is a great opportunity to get a QB3. But if you're a rebuilding team, this is a chance. Pick him up as a QB2 in a trade, and if he hits, it'll be well worth it. Baker Mayfield is number 3 on my list at quarterback, and this is a situation, too, where the Bucs added some weapons in the draft. Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round at receiver, Bucky Irving to complement that backfield there with Rachaad White. So, and Bucky Irving's a pass-catching running back, so I think that also is very helpful for somebody like Mayfield. So Chris Godwin is going to be moving back to the slot. They re-signed Mike Evans earlier in the offseason. So, this is a guy that was QB 10 last year overall, QB 19 in points per game. So again, I think given the quarterback injuries last year, some of these, final quarterback rankings are a little bit deceiving. Having, both Goff and Mayfield as top 10 quarterbacks, I think their points per game marks are probably a little bit more, important in terms of predicting how good they're going to be next year. But still, QB 19, he'll probably be somewhere in that range. I imagine between 15 and 19, 15 and 20 is probably a good slot for him. And it's going to be year 2 in Tampa Bay, more comfortable with everything there. Will be a new offensive coaching staff. But again, he got the contract. He's going to be there the next few years. And as a solid QB2 or a high-level QB3, if you're a contending team, I think that Baker Mayfield is a great target to go fill that role. And last but not least, at the quarterback position, we have somebody that I think you can buy very low right now that certainly could be a solid QB3 as long as he's healthy, and that's Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. The big thing for me post-draft that to me has seen his value increase is the fact that they did not take a quarterback in the 1st round. There were a lot of rumors that they were interested in both Drake May and J.J. McCarthy. They were not able to trade up for Drake May. They passed on J.J. McCarthy. So Daniel Jones is probably going to be the guy this year for the Giants, assuming he is healthy. Now, there is some trickery that they could do with his contract because there's an injury guarantee. So if they truly have moved on, there's always an outside risk that he gets benched, sort of like a Russell Wilson situation from last year. But this is somebody that was very good for fantasy football in 2022. He has rushing upside, and he's still young. He's in he got the contract, but he's in kind of a big prove-it year, and he finally has a stud wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, who they took in the top 10. So this is something where, again, as long as he's healthy, as long as he sees the field, he's going to be better, I think, than where he's being valued right now in Dynasty. And, this is somebody that, you would have needed to move a 1st-round pick for 2 years ago to acquire in Dynasty, and now you can get Daniel Jones for a late 2nd, early 3rd, mediocre depth wide receiver, something like that. I mean, this is not a situation where it's going to cost a ton, but I think if you tossed a late 2nd-round pick and someone, not necessarily somebody all that special off your bench, but, a late second in Rashad Bateman for Daniel Jones, I think that's a deal that could probably get done in a lot of leagues, because there's just a lot of people that are done with Daniel Jones. They don't think he has it. And if you're a contender and you need some quarterback depth, particularly if you're, somebody that, maybe you had a Justin Fields situation last year where you were counting on him and then, that situation blew up. So if you need an extra guy, Daniel Jones is probably the cheapest starting quarterback out there that you can go get that I think still has some actual upside. There are other guys that are probably in the same type of tier value-wise, but I just don't think possess much of a ceiling. Think like a Geno Smith or something along those lines. But Daniel Jones still has some upside because of his rushing ability. So if Malik Neighbors can, help him out, I think, we could see a bit of a surprise from him this season. And even if he doesn't work out, you're not giving up the farm to go get somebody like Jones. So I think it makes it, worth the risk considering how important the quarterback position is in Superflex. So we're going to move on to the running backs next. I've got 5 different guys I want to talk about, and we'll start with Joe Mixon. So Joe Mixon traded from the Bengals to the Texans, and this is someone that I think a lot of people have been just, they just don't feel that great about Joe Mixon. I mean, it's just something where he's all right, he's there, he's capable, but he's not exciting, right? But he was running back 11 last year in points per game, running back 6 overall. I think people would be surprised to learn that. And he ended up going to Houston. He's in a very good offense. He was extended, and the team didn't draft a running back on day 2. Of course not on day 1 either, but this is a situation where they didn't really take anybody in the draft that is going to push him for playing time. I mean, this is not a situation where there's a third-round running back, staring Joe Mixon down, ready to take over. I mean, it's going to be Joe Mixon. I mean, Dameon Pierce is, probably, just a handcuff at this point. I don't think he really has much value left. So it's going to be Joe Mixon in Houston on a good offense. And I don't think, even though he's been good for fantasy football, at least from a ranking standpoint, I don't think he's going to cost a ton to get. I think you can get him for a second-round pick. He's going to be on a good offense, and who knows how long he will be there. He did sign the extension, but again, you never really know, given the way the guarantees are structured, how many years he'll make it. But the fact that they extended him in the first place, I think, shows that Houston believes he's going to be there and be their starting running back for at least the next 2 seasons. So, in Dynasty, I don't really think you can look at running backs in windows longer than 2 years. The position, the landscape just changes so much to where it's really difficult to be like, oh yeah, this guy's going to be a starting running back on my team 4 years from now, 5 years from now. I just don't think that really is possible outside of the 1 or 2 very rare players, maybe like a Bijan or Breece Hall or something. But even then, it's not a guarantee. So to get a 2-year starting running back for a mid-second round pick, I think that's really good, especially if you're a contender. Get some running back depth. It's going to be a situation where there's going to be upside. So given the fact that Houston did not take a running back that I am worried about in the draft, I think that makes Joe Mixon a winner post-draft. Now, next up is somebody that had kind of a resurgence last year in Houston. It's Devin Singletary, and then he left as a free agent to go to the New York Giants, where, not a great offense, subpar offensive line. They lost Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones has question marks, whether it be performance or injury. And, here's Devin Singletary, where you kind of figured, well, maybe the Giants invest a day 2 pick on a running back, and they didn't. Tyrone Tracy is the rookie sensation that people are targeting in 4th rounds of rookie drafts, myself included. I think Tracy has some upside. He's an explosive player, but at the same time, Devin Singletary is still going to be the leader in this backfield, even if it is some sort of committee. Singletary is paired back with a coaching staff that played him a ton in Buffalo. He's going to get both, early down work. He can catch some passes, and he's going to have solid volume, which I think is very important for fantasy football. Nobody is necessarily arguing that Devin Singletary is the most talented running back out there, but he is somebody that's going to get volume. He's going to be given the ball, and that's really all you can ask for in terms of, fantasy football for your running backs. Just get him the ball, see what he can make of his opportunity. And Devin Singletary is somebody that, again, if this Giants offense can just take some small steps forward, he's going to have some value. And whether it's as an RB2 or more likely as a solid flex play, I think that's some good depth to have on your team. And he's going to carry value for the season. He signed a 3-year deal too, I believe. So it's something where he's probably going to be there at least 2 years. And that's, again, like we just mentioned with Joe Mixon, 2 years of some solid production, based on volume, not necessarily talent, but still, production is production. And I think it's worth the shot here on Devin Singletary. And because there was no high-level running back added in the draft, I think that, boosted my interest in Singletary for this upcoming season. Next up, we have, another situation where I think a lot of people thought that the team would draft a running back, and they didn't. And this is, frankly, the most recurring theme among all 5 players here that I'm going to mention, is all from teams that we thought might draft a running back, decently high in the draft, but did not. So next up on the list is Zamir White of the Raiders. And the Raiders took Dylan Laube late in the draft, a 6th round. But he's just going to be more of a pass-catching depth player. I like Laube, but I do think that Zamir White is probably going to be a bell cow in this offense. And again, it's not going to be a great offense, but volume is volume, and he's going to get a lot of opportunities. He's young. He ended the season on a strong note in the last 4 or 5 games of the season for the Raiders. So whether this is somebody that turns into, a star or somebody that's going to be a long-term high-level running back, I don't know that I would go that far. But if you're looking for, a player that is going to be on the field a ton, is going to have some pretty high weekly upside, I think that Zamir White can be that guy. And, if you're somebody looking to add running back depth, I think Zamir White could be a very good running back 2, running back 3 flex player that you can plug into your lineup. Especially at the beginning of the season. It's going to be Zamir White and pretty much nobody else. So quarterback is going to remain an issue for this team. They're going to have to run the ball, and Zamir White's somebody that I'm willing to take a shot on, given what I expect to be someone that is getting the ball, 20 times a game. Number 4 at the running back position is Zach Moss, who you could also throw Chase Brown in here, but I think Zach Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals is someone that I have grown a little bit more excited about since the NFL draft, because Cincinnati didn't add anyone to compete for that running back spot, and he's going to be the starter. Chase Brown will certainly get the ball, and it will be somewhat of a committee, but I think Moss is going to be the leader of this committee. And this is somebody that was RB27 in points per game last year. I think you could see something similar, if not, a little bit higher this year, because he is on a good offense in Cincinnati. And, we saw what Joe Mixon did in this situation last year. So, again, I think you can get Zach Moss very cheap right now. And because I think people are more excited about Chase Brown. And, it's understandable given the age and, that Chase Brown was a good player at Illinois coming out of college, but Zach Moss, got some decent money from the Bengals, and, that talks. So I would expect Moss to lead this backfield, and I think you can get him pretty cheap. And as somebody that, if you're a contending team, again, I would be looking at buying. The final player is Zeke Elliott from the Dallas Cowboys. He's heading back to Dallas, and this is, again, somebody that pre-NFL draft, I think people just sort of figured that he was done. He was probably headed towards either retirement or a vet minimum deal where he's going to be, at best, a situation that he was in last year in New England where he really only has impact if the starter gets hurt. But he is going to be the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. And, people want to talk about Rico Dowdle and, whatnot, and he's certainly going to see the field. But Zeke Elliott's going to be the starter. He's going to have a lot of volume. this is another situation where I think he's lost, the talent, but when you get the volume, it still makes you a good play for fantasy. So he's extremely cheap. I don't think that he's going to cost more than, an early third round pick, depending on the type of team that has him. If it's a rebuilder that still is hanging on to Zeke, I think you can get him pretty cheap. You can get him thrown in a package, which I did recently in a trade that we talked about last week. So this is somebody that you can acquire, is going to have flex, upside on a weekly basis, on a good offense. And it's somebody that I'm happy to take the shot on, especially given that he is a good pass catcher. And this is an offense that, they're going to throw the ball a lot, but Zeke is going to be involved, I think, both at the goal line, in the passing game, and on early downs. So pretty much a workhorse back type of situation. And he's so cheap right now, I'm all in on Zeke Elliott. Moving over to wide receiver, I think there are fewer players that I am more excited about post-draft, but I think that makes sense given how strong the wide receiver draft class was. We saw a lot of teams add players, so there weren't as many teams that, avoided the position, which, impacts this type of segment on the show. But there are still a handful of players here that I do find myself more interested in post-draft. And so we'll start with number one, who I think is in line for a potential very nice second-year breakout season, and that is Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, who had a very nice rookie season. He really came on strong at the end of the season, and he's the clear wide receiver one for the Baltimore Ravens. And they didn't add really anybody to compete with Zay Flowers. I mean, they added Tez Walker in the 4th round, who could be a nice, sleeper pick. We talked about him on episode 14 of the show as a late round target in your rookie drafts. But it's Rashad Bateman, Tez Walker, Zay Flowers. You want to throw like Nelson Aguilar in the mix, whatever. But it's pretty much Zay Flowers and nobody else. And so wide receiver 30 last year, I believe that Flowers really has a nice opportunity as Lamar Jackson's clear top option to take that next leap and, kind of go from where he is right now as sort of a mid, he's promising, right? But I think there are a lot of people that are still a little skeptical given the size and Lamar Jackson, his arm and things like that, may or may not be founded. But Zay Flowers has a chance to jump into sort of that top 10, top 12 type of range as a wide receiver, kind of, closer to maybe somebody where like Drake London is if he has a good season. So I like Flowers, as I think second-year receivers are always a good shot to take because that second year does tend to be a really common breakout year. And so given how strong he was as a rookie, I'd be perfectly happy trying to acquire him and capitalizing on that second season with Baltimore. Next up is somebody that I think most people are just flat out forgetting about, and that is Josh Palmer of the LA Chargers, who I believe will be the Chargers wide receiver one in 2024, which may be a bit of a hot take, but everyone is so enamored with Ladd McConkey, and I totally understand why. Early second round pick, impressive tape, a rookie coming out of Georgia. I get it. And then there's, QJ, Quentin Johnston, who first round pick, seems like a bust, but a lot of people are still wondering, maybe he could figure it out. But people are just forgetting about Josh Palmer, who was a solid receiver for this team the past few years. And, I think he does have a connection with Herbert, and I would be surprised to see McConkey just outright take over that wide receiver one role in 2024, which is what I think is being projected right now. I know in Best Ball on Underdog and DraftKings and whatnot, Ladd McConkey is going very high, like right around like pick 70 or so, I believe, which to me is way too high. I don't see the situation where McConkey just is this, stud receiver as a rookie. I think he's going to be a good receiver, but from a production standpoint, I think that Palmer's going to have a nice season. He's going to be on the field a ton. He's going to start in, pretty much I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 on the depth chart. So he's going to be out there all the time. And even if he falls to number 2 or number 3, I think he's still going to be on the field a ton. So, as somebody that you can probably get for a 3rd-round pick, I think Josh Palmer is a smash play. I think he can give you solid upside on a weekly basis. I think you can start him as a flex, and certainly is going to be somebody that you can plug in on bye weeks. And, if he truly ends up being the wide receiver 1, you're going to be able to start him far more often than not, even with the Chargers throwing the ball less, given the new Jim Harbaugh offense. But Josh Palmer is somebody that I have on a whole bunch of teams, and I think that he has some pretty good upside in 2024. The next guy on the list is Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons, who have Mooney slotted in as the wide receiver 2 on this team. They didn't add anyone in the draft to, compete for this role. And with Kirk Cousins taking over, this is going to be a situation where, Drake London is getting all the hype, and for good reason. I think he's a very, very good wide receiver. I like him a lot. And, there's Kyle Pitts, who, people still think very highly of, and, I think he's still so young. I think he has very high ceiling and is going to be a good fantasy tight end for a long time. It's whether or not he's going to be tight end 1, whatever. He might not reach necessarily the hype that he once had, but he's still going to be a good player. And Darnell Mooney is going to become wide receiver 2 on a team where Kirk Cousins has supported a bunch of weapons on a team before. He's done it each of the last several years. Just look at last year's Vikings team where there was Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and even KJ Osborne. So, this is a situation where the Atlanta offense should be taking another step forward, and Mooney should be the 3rd target in this offense. So, it's going to be something where he's going to have flex upside. He's going to be able to start for you on bye weeks and give you some solid depth. And he's still at a pretty young age. This isn't somebody that's, 28, 29. He's still right in the prime of his career. And, so I'm happy to take that shot. We saw that he can be a very good player. He really broke out with Justin Fields and, was his number 1 target for a year before getting hurt. So I like Darnell Mooney. I think he's going to provide some nice, upside to this Atlanta offense. And again, for somebody that you can get for pretty cheap in Dynasty to, have some depth, I am all about acquiring Darnell Mooney. And last but not least, we have Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions, who is someone that I've never really been a fan of. I hated the pick when the Lions made it. I thought that there were other players on the board that, that they should take on the defensive side of the ball. But now I think the price on Jameson Williams has finally come down enough to where I'm willing to take a shot on him should the situation present itself for me. I don't think I have him on any teams right now, but I wouldn't be opposed to it like I maybe would have been before, because Detroit didn't go out and draft another wide receiver. They didn't sign anybody in free agency to take that role away. So Jameson Williams is going to be the wide receiver 2 for the Detroit Lions. That's going to be a great offense, and there's going to be, targets for Williams, and he's a deep threat guy. We saw in his limited playing time that when he does make an impact, it's usually on these explosive types of plays. And, he even has a little bit of upside running the ball. We saw that in the playoff game against the 49ers. So, again, I'm not going to pay, first round type of prices for him. I think there are probably some people that still are just holding on to the fact that he was a first round pick in rookie drafts a couple years ago. So I'm not willing to go, that high. But again, if you're talking an early 3rd, a 2-3 turn, late 2nd, something like that, I'm more open to that now. But I also think it's a good situation for, packaging Williams in with other players in a larger deal. I think that's a situation where it can make more sense, kind of try to use him as more of a throw-in. So that's something that you can certainly take a look at. There's going to be some upside here. And so while I don't believe that Jameson Williams is ever going to meet his, first-round draft capital hype, I do think that, he's going to contribute for fantasy football this year can be better than Josh Reynolds was last year, and he's probably going to be a big-time touchdown threat. So that's somebody that I think could be worth taking a shot on in your dynasty leagues. Moving on over to the tight end position, the final three players that we're going to touch on in this episode, and we'll start with Greg Dulcich from the Denver Broncos, who I think is somebody that really could break out this year, and you can get him for next to nothing. I mean, you can get him for a 4th-round pick, and there's Adam Troutman, who stinks, but he's still there in Denver. And honestly, this whole situation with Greg Dulcich just comes down to two things. It is whether or not he can stay healthy, and how Sean Payton views Greg Dulcich. Because again, Greg Dulcich was not somebody that Sean Payton drafted. Dulcich dealt with a lot of injuries last year, hamstring problems, didn't really play much at all. And so if he can come back and be healthy, he really flashed as a rookie. I mean, he was a good downfield threat for Russell Wilson. So the upside is there. That team needs playmakers. It needs somebody that can step up in the receiving game. And, why not Greg Dulcich? You can get him for so cheap that, if he fails, it's not going to hurt you. And it's something where the Broncos did not address the position in the NFL draft. And so I'm willing to acquire Dulcich. I've done it in a couple spots and already had him in a few leagues as well. So I'm hoping for the breakout. He's somebody that I think is a good player. So fingers crossed for Greg Dulcich to break out. Now, next up is the only rookie on this list, which kind of makes sense given sort of the nature of the episode, is that there won't be rookies included in this. But Ben Sinnott of the Washington Commanders does make this list for me because I viewed him as tight end 3 prior to the NFL draft. I liked him, but I wasn't sure that he was going to go high enough to where he could have much of an impact as a rookie. But he ended up being tight end 2 post-draft. He went in the 2nd round to Washington. He's in a good situation paired with Jane Daniels. And so this is someone that certainly moved up for me in my rankings, and I'm much more excited about him. I was able to nab him in at least one rookie draft, and I wish I could have gotten him in more leagues, but I think people are catching on to the hype for Ben Sinnott, and so I think this is something where the value for him overall is certainly going up. And I don't know that he's necessarily going to provide a huge impact as a rookie, but I do think Ben Sinnott is somebody that could follow the Trey McBride path, where he plays a little bit more sparingly as a rookie, but by year 2, Zach Ertz will probably move on. It's funny, Zach Ertz is the same guy that was in Arizona ahead of Trey McBride, and there is Cliff Kingsbury there, so I think there are some parallels to that situation. And Ben Sinnott, very athletic guy, and I like the fact that he's coming into the league at the same time as his quarterback. So this is someone that I think is a smash pick in the late 2nd of rookie drafts in a standard 12-team Superflex draft. And I'm happy to add to pretty much any team regardless of my tight end situation. And last but not least, the final player to talk about on today's show is Colby Parkinson of the Rams, who, not really a big impact player for fantasy, but Tyler Higbee is likely going to miss some time at the beginning of the year at a minimum while he recovers from his knee injury. And the Rams signed Parkinson and gave him a whole bunch of money over what I believe was a 3-year contract. So this is somebody that, will provide some tight end depth for your team. He's probably somebody that you can find on waivers in a lot of leagues. And if not on waivers, he's somebody that you can easily get for a 4th or more likely even just in a small bench player type of swap or as just a complete throw-in in a trade for something else. So if you're a team that is a little bit thin at the position and, especially early in the year, you might need somebody to throw in for a few weeks. Maybe you're a TJ Hawkinson manager who also might miss some time to start the year. Colby Parkinson is somebody that can step in. This is an offense that has shown they'll throw to the tight end. And, they didn't just pay him a bunch of money to have him sit on the bench. So whether he's certainly not going to ever be some high level, big time fantasy tight end, but sometimes you got to stream the position, and it's something where you can toss him on your bench, have him ready to go should you need to use him, and give you some peace of mind at that position that you can essentially get for free. So Colby Parkinson, he's the final guy on this list. The value that I think has increased post-draft because, again, the Rams, didn't address the position early in the draft, and I think there is, some opportunity there, and so I'm willing to jump in on him, especially because this is the time of year, and this is not just a point specific to Parkinson, but just a good general point if you've made it this far in the show, is with the rookie drafts, as you've probably already seen throughout your leagues, people are going to drop a whole bunch of players because they got to make room for the rookie class that, with all the picks they just made. There's going to be free agents that they want to pick up that went undrafted. So this is something where it's important to take a look at all the players that do get dropped in your league, because Colby Parkinson might be somebody that was rostered and now is out there to be picked up. There are probably a whole lot of other guys that, fit this category as well, where you go, hey, why did this player just get dropped when he's going to have a role? But, people just get that rookie fever. They want to pick guys up, churn their rosters a little bit. And it makes sense in a certain sense. If there's, a rebuilder that had Parkinson on their team, maybe don't feel like it's necessary to roster that type of depth at that position. So just go check your waiver wire. And if he's not on waivers, go see what team has him. See if you can work him into a larger deal as a throw-in. And I think he could give you some nice depth at the position. So there you have it. That's everything for today. Players that I like more now than I did pre-NFL draft. Like I said, next week we will do the opposite. We'll talk about players whose value has decreased, or players that their situations were really just hurt because of what their team did in the NFL draft. So we'll talk about that next week. But that's all for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, this is the Dynasty War Room podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you all next week.